Hello and welcome to Computer Séance, a podcast featuring spirited discussion about AI and popular culture. I'm Justin.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Tracie.
Each episode, we take a seat at the table to conjure the spirits of AI past, present, and future, trying to find the meaning in the technological wonders imagined within popular fictions. All ideas presented in this podcast are understood to be the presenter's own. They do not reflect the thoughts, ideas, opinions, or positions of our employers, their programs, or their representatives. Ben, this week you're taking the helm. What do you have in store for us?
Today we're discussing The General, an episode of the 1960s British TV show The Prisoner. The premise of The Prisoner is that a British secret agent resigns and is promptly abducted from his house in London. He finds himself in a mysterious village, a sort of holiday camp prison filled with other ex-agents. The context is Cold War espionage, but it's not clear which side runs the village or where it is. Everyone in the village is referred to by number, and he is assigned the number 6. The chief antagonist of the series is number 2, a position leading the village which is filled by different people at different times. The series mostly consists of number 2 trying to break number 6 and number 6 trying to escape. Overall, the series is allegorical, exploring the relation between the individualism of number 6 and collectivism and state authority represented by the village. Some episodes pick up more specific allegories, and The General is one of those, telling a story about education, technology, and mass media. The series came out at a time of technological and scientific optimism. The space race was in full swing. It was also a time when media technology was opening up new possibilities in education, with the Open University being developed during this period and established shortly after the series had aired. So Justin, Tracie, I think this is the first time you've seen The Prisoner, and I was just wondering what your first thoughts were.
You want to go first? No? I loved The Prisoner. I'd never seen it before, and I got so obsessed after the episodes you assigned us that I watched more. I was that interested in it. It really left me thinking, them or us?
I also watched more than one episode. I really got into it. I also had to find out immediately where it was filmed.
Yeah.
It's apparently a little seaside town in Wales.
We're going to take a trip. Tracie, what was your favorite part of watching?
Is this the right moment to briefly touch on the rover, the giant weather balloon thing? So when people try to escape off the island or whatever, you don't really know exactly what's the landscape. You know, there's mountains because he goes to look at a map of the village and it's just like village and then mountains. And that's all that's labeled on the map. But there's this giant white weather balloon that chases after you if you're doing bad things. And it kind of, as a weapon, I think it's really interesting because it's not like phallic and pointy and piercing. It is this giant weather balloon thing that envelops you in its bubble and it bounces around the pathways. It moves in these really organic way. And I just thought that's a really interesting approach for a surveillance technology.
It was horror schlock, and I loved it, right? Because it's like also the faces that get made when the plasticine bubble is like pushed against the face and they're kind of screaming out, looking for air.
It smothers you.
Yeah, it smothers you. And also it like tamps you, like beats you, which I thought was really beautiful. The joy of that kind of future where everyone is socialized to be controlled. Everyone just looks away and doesn't care. It's sort of beautiful. Very interesting.
And I think it is so interesting as a way to depict something because it doesn't kind of fall into a kind of obvious, like predictable kind of idea of a kind of robot or something like this.
No, not at all.
It's that you don't really know what it's doing. There's interesting scenes where it sort of carries people, like if they swim out to sea, it carries them back. And it's part of the culture of the village, and what it's talking to is media surveillance.
And the inability to opt out. That's right from the beginning. You had us watch this establishing episode of the first episode of The Prisoner. And in that, he's really railing against the inability, like obviously individuality is a big theme in the show. And he's sad that, for example, he can't drive himself anywhere. He has to use a taxi. And when he approaches his home, the door automatically opens for him. And when he's sitting in the office with number 2 once and the breakfast has arrived and it's still covered, he's asking him, what do you want for breakfast? And he says it, and you pick up
one rasher or 2.
Exactly. Yeah. And then he opens up the breakfast and he sees that exactly what he would have asked for is sitting underneath there. This idea that I think the discomfort with being predictable or being able to be predicted is something that we still see threads of today, like big time, actually.
Yeah.
So the episode that we're studying begins with number 6 at a cafe in the village. A special announcement from the General's Department comes out over the tannoy. Will all students taking the 3-part history course return to their dwellings immediately? The professor will be lecturing in approximately 30 minutes. The lecture is delivered on television. We are introduced to something called Speed Learn. It offers a 3-year course indelibly impressed on the mind in 3 minutes. Today's lecture is Europe since Napoleon. A 6-month study delivered in just 15 seconds imposed directly onto the cortex of the brain. So we hear that the revolution is that there's going to be no more tedious learning by rote, but still it seems to be the same kind of learning and the same kind of knowledge that's being, transmitted, and a lot of recall. This is leaning into a few different things. Education as a kind of potentially trivializing process or potentially propaganda. We have interesting sequences where everyone is able to repeat the context of the lecture, almost repeat the actual lecture itself.
When was the Treaty of Adrianople?
September 1829.
What happened in 1830?
Greek independence was assured and guaranteed.
By whom?
Russia, France, Britain.
Who is Bismarck's ally against Danish Prince Christian of Glucksburg?
Frederick of Augustenburg.
And they can do it in unison with perfect recall. What do you think of how this makes us think about education, also how education and technology come together?
I really resented this idea that learning is tedious.
Yeah.
I mean, rote learning is tedious. It's true. We kind of see some flavors of this today in the discussion of how AI will be integrated in the classroom, that it will speed learning up and allow us to learn faster. Like there's this emphasis on efficiency, on speed that I think we still see now, instead of thinking about how we might transform education. If it's so tedious, then why don't we rethink it? And the answer is just to do rote learning faster. That's what the thing is. And I think about, at some point he calls them intelligent cabbages.
Yeah.
Number 6 refers to the people as intelligent cabbages. And that is so striking to me, because when you learn something, different aspects of that knowledge are more vivid to you based on your personal lived experience and your interests. And if we were to be sitting here talking about the treaty of whatever it was again, you and I would both have different things that occur to us about how we learn that knowledge. And in this case, they're just saying the same things that each other know back and forth at one another. And I don't see how that can be generative, how you can really draw anything out of that.
And what have we got?
A row of cabbages.
Indeed. Knowledgeable cabbages.
What sort of knowledge?
For the time being, past history will have to do, but shortly we shall be making our own.
It is only late in the episode that we actually meet the general, and it turns out the general is not a military officer as we'd probably presumed, but a computer, a big mainframe computer with lots of buttons and spinning tape and switches. We learn a bit about how it works. The professor spends time writing away on his typewriter. He seems to be responsible for the lecture text. The general's role seems to be to check the text against a bank of knowledge and to translate the lecture into the program for SpeedLearn. There's different ways to read that, but partly that's potentially propaganda. But I think maybe even more subtly, the past history that the professor is writing is also a history he's making.
Yeah.
And when you're asked a question in a cafe, what happened in 1830? Like quite a lot of things happened, right? Yeah. So the way that the lecture then kind of formats what's considered and what's included within what's learnt and what we consider knowledge and whose stories get told and so on. So for me, there's a way this comes back not simply to a kind of technologically embodied, imprinting knowledge on your brain thing, but just to what we're teaching.
The fact that the computer is called the general brings this militaristic feel to things that kind of lean in the direction of potentially like that the future of this education will be propaganda. And, we have applications of AI that are used in warfare, the same technology that we're planning on applying in education. It is dubious, in some ways. I wondered if they were doing a little bit of shade at the Open University using television as a broadcast mechanism. Yeah. But I think that it's one of these things like that it's not so much the technology, but the motivations behind wanting to use this technology that make it, evil. It's like how you want to apply it, whereas the Open University is about making education accessible, the village, that is not what it's about. You know, you get a sense that it's not what it's about.
I guess the question I have in relation to that is, having engaged with this popular culture artifact, how does it make you reflect on your own teaching and learning?
Okay, so I guess when I'm thinking about the conversations of applying AI in the classroom now,
Nice.
we still need people to do stuff. You still need the people that have pedagogical knowledge, the people that know how to get things across. You still need those people. And the fact the professor says speed learning is slavery, it is a sentiment that I hear a lot of educators saying now about the content that they're creating that will then be delivered by AI to students, and they feel resentful about it in the same way. The professor's labor is taken, but also manipulated and undermined. And I think that's something that people fear when they think about applying AI in the classroom, and thinking about, like, why do we need and want humans in the classroom? And I think that it conveys the trust in the technology to the human recipients. Like, you need the person in order to deliver that, to transfer that trust onto the technology. And, you know, this is a conversation we have constantly about technology, trustworthy technology. Technology is not trustworthy. People are.
Well, and this brings us to the professor then, in terms of this question of the embodiment of trust.
So one of the fascinating things about just trying to work out what's going on in this episode from our point of view of looking at the computer is it's not quite clear what the computer's doing. It seems to be the professor's pedagogy is already, you know, he's developed speed learn, he's built the general to help him do this. We're told that you can't have one without the other, so that the whole process relies on the sort of human face of the professor. It's his sort of face kind of that we see in the television. That's part of whatever this media technology is that helps us do it, helps us learn this information. I think it's also interesting, this era of computing, that there's a kind of one big mainframe that he's made that's like a kind of one-off machine. And you get this trope in a lot of sci-fi where there's some kind of mainframe that's spatially located and you can do something about it in a plot, right? So you can go and destroy it. And in this era, that's kind of true. This is a sort of one-off kind of entity. Or if we think of whatever the equivalent technology is, you can't kind of turn it off, right? It's kind of in the cloud and it's open source and it's being used here and there and everywhere. So it's sort of, there isn't really a way to kind of get rid of it in the same way that speed learn can't move forward because at the end of the episode, the machine is destroyed and the professor dies trying to save it. So then you have a kind of end to that in a way you can't have now.
You just said something interesting. The professor dies trying to save it. This kind of goes back to, like, why did he build the general? What, like you said, it's not really clear other than translating maybe his lectures into a medium that can be broadcast in like an efficient way. And the general, I guess, is responsible for how it goes directly into the cortex or whatever. We're seeing this now in technology, this idea of regret for things that we've built, but also this kind of the seductiveness and the attachment to the things that we've built at the same time. So it's like very ambivalent feelings about what it is that we've done.
Yeah, in my notes I have supercomputer equals love-hate child object. Which I think just describes exactly what you just said in a really short way. Like, yeah, that's strange.
There is in the architecture of the whole thing this kind of transmittal idea of learning and knowing, which is all of, you know, the world coming in, rather than us constructing and experimenting and forming our own knowledge in response to experience, say.
Yeah. I mean, there's also a critique. It's somewhat critiquing the Open University potentially and its vision of an educational future, but it's also critiquing the BBC, isn't it? Because the BBC was meant to be the social educating mind.
That's one of the biggest
British
partners of the Open University.
Yeah, of course. And the tenets of that are quite interesting because they're gesturing to the ways in which that is kind of social control.
There's always been like a discursive element, like OU education, for example. Before the internet, you would have day schools where you would still go and meet your other colleagues and talk about the things. It wasn't like one directional.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's, and you know, of course, then with social media, there started being like forums where people could discuss the things they were learning. but there's nothing for them to discuss. They're
that's interesting.
They're just talking back and forth, having the exact same information.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that it's history, because we know that history is contested.
Yeah.
There are things to discuss, but they don't have anything to discuss with one another.
Yeah, it's anti-dialogic. Yeah.
So going back to your point about learning being kind of individual versus social, they have these, social moments in the cafe, which are a little bit like those must-watch moments on TV, right? Like, did you see that thing on television last night that, it's not really there anymore? And
Ross and Rachel,
And so they're having one of those moments and they're genuinely excited by it. And it is, in a way, a shared experience, because in the same way that television is a shared experience in this way, but they actually have no way of having a conversation because all they can do is repeat it.
Yeah.
And so it's this actually quite strange mix-up between collectivism and individualism, which is what the whole show is really about. So you have this collectivism that's become individualized.
I wish we had seen, there's this idea that the professor has a real lecture, a revolutionary lecture that he's going to give that's like against speed learn. And number 6 tries briefly to infiltrate the area where they upload the lectures and to kind of put this rogue lecture on. And I think similarly, people that have good ideas are going to be able to use technology to make their good ideas stronger. Like that does happen, If the professor's lecture had been allowed to go out and his words had reached the residents of the village in a way that would have really reshaped how they're thinking about things, that's a positive thing. So if the technology manages to amplify some voices that have good ideas, I'm happy for that. It just tends to be that those that have access to this technology and have the ability to amplify their voice with it are not those necessarily that have the best intentions for the rest of the world.
And just to build on that slightly, it's the second lecture that wasn't given, right, is still just his perspective on a set of social relations and ideas.
True. I don't know what he was planning on saying.
Right. No, exactly. But like it would have been also still just learned into their cortex and they would just be able to spout it, right? So the whole point here is that this tension between sort of like the creative endeavor of knowledge production and the function of information seems to be at play quite beautifully.
It sets up the dilemma of thinking you're right as an educator, right? Or as the state or as a revolutionary. You have in that technology essentially the amplification of what you think is good, but actually that kind of something in the process is off, whatever the content is. So we have this interesting exchange early on. So we have number 6 is asked, what was the Treaty of Adrianople? And he answers September 1829. He can only give the answer he's given from the lecture. And then we have a similar kind of shift in type of question right at the end in the finale. Number 2 has been boasting about the general and how it can answer anything and so on. He's going to use it to prove the guilt of number 12, who'd been helping number 6. Just before this question gets fed into the machine, number 6 proposes asking a question that can't be answered. And number 2 is confident enough or wants to demonstrate his confidence in the general and its infallibility that he lets number 6 do this. So number 6 types into the typewriter, feeds this question into the machine to get the little data card and puts that into the general. And suddenly we get the sort of voltage dials moving up to danger. We get lots of gears grinding and smoke. We can't turn it off. And then the whole thing is giving us electrical shocks and the machine blows up. And number 12 goes to move the professor away from the machine and both die. And number 2 then asks, what was your question? And number 6 says, WHY, why? A question that's insoluble for man or machine.
In hearing you recall it that way, it made me think of ChatGPT and the current structure of ChatGPT and things like Claude, etc., that have been skinned to do that whirring and buzzing. So you now, you type in a question And it's like thinking through this, it tells you what it's trying to do in the way that the computer in this is performing its own like mechanism. And I'm interested in the way in which we need that interlocutive kind of like there's work being done. Because part of this is about the seamlessness of the tedious and wasteful learning, right? The process of acquiring knowledge or even asking a question would feel in their cosmology useless because it's tedious. It's too much energy. You should just be given it and know it and be able to, and just the facts, as we get in the first episode so often, just the facts, where you only care about the facts. But why we imagine or desire this kind of need for like the work to be performed and shown to us in some way, it somehow feels that's the human.
And I can relate to that because I also thought of ChatGPT and how at the beginning when it came out, a lot of my friends who are computer scientists were annoyed that they could not look under the hood at what rules were like kind of static in place in the background that helped it to be like a helpful chatty agent and what was actually a result of whatever it was doing in the background. Computer scientists are always thinking about how to break something, how to get around whatever it thinks might be background rules. Like, for example, when they thought it might have some sort of background architecture that kept it from saying like shitty, racist, horrible things like every other language model did before that. And they were trying to circumvent it, you know? So in that sense, like number 6 in that moment is really acting like a computer scientist in the way that he tries to stress test this machine. And most people who've been also anti-technology have loved the concept of like what machines can't do. What are they capable of doing? What are they incapable of doing? And I have to admit, when I think about large language models, they do struggle to have a perspective, you know? Yeah. And I think that that's related maybe to the why question, because why questions are about desire. They're about motivation. They're about things that machines don't have. And so like when you ask it to have a perspective on something, it's like having a perspective on that is a deeply important question and blah, 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 blah. And it says a lot of fluff, you know, but it doesn't give you any kind of real response that has perspective for obvious reasons. That's why all the discussion is about alignment right now, because they're realizing that, the output is crap. It's AI slop, basically, is the word for it now.
What do you think about the why question or why AI question in a sort of bigger framing? So there's lots of reasons that big tech people would say why AI, right? And in a way, the whole idea of artificial intelligence has always been a marketing slogan of one kind or another. Yeah. But, you know, there are sort of answers to that, which is going to help us with climate change modeling, or it's going to boost productivity and so on. But like in another, just thinking about, you know, the deaths in this final scene. Yeah. You know, there's the amount of water it consumes, the metals it consumes, so on. Why AI?
I had to give a talk at a UN-related event, and people are always like, oh, AI is going to help us solve world hunger. It's going to help us solve climate change. And we already actually have very good answers for both of those questions. And we don't listen to those answers. So what makes us think, what evidence do we actually have to think that we are going to listen to and follow an answer when it's provided to us by AI? So I don't know that I actually have any real evidence that it is going to contribute something more positively than if we tried to resolve these things in any other way. That doesn't mean that it's not still fun for some people. They enjoy using it, whatever. But I don't really have a lot of hope that it's going to do much to solve our big social pressing issues.
Okay, final thoughts?
Okay, so I'm gonna kick it off.
Do it.
I don't know if I'm reading way too much into this, but I do think that the series is so aesthetically purposeful that I don't think I am. Yeah. There's a sign on the wall in the first episode that we watched that read, "Questions are a burden to others, answers are prison for oneself." And right away, the use of the word prison made me ask myself if it's a clue about what the village really is. Number 6 spends his time trying to find answers from other people about why he's there and how to get out. And I did have a little sneak peek about the very end of the show. And he seems to have like this self-actualizing moment. And I'm wondering if like that's if there's two reads of this. One is that what's actually happening in each episode, which is very like detective procedural kind of thing in this weird world. But really, is this about him learning to stop seeking these answers, and that the questioning of himself is really the task he needs to do to kind of release himself from this prison. And if I connect that back with technology now, this like that the best uses maybe of some of the technologies that are available to us right now are not to give us answers, but to help us in the exploration of themes potentially. And that was just one of the things that I was thinking about as I got to the end of the episode.
Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you so much, Tracie. Thank you so much for being with us today on Computer Séance. That's all the time we have today. Thanks for joining us. Be seeing you. Don't miss any of our conversations about popular culture and AI. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and be sure to leave us a review.
This podcast is funded by a UK Research and Innovation Future Leaders Fellowship.